host, Michael Ratner.
So I'm interested, CJ, if you went to the trouble of writing this fairly sizable tome, is it mainly your fear of global warming that's the prime motivation behind this book, or is it something else?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and yes and no. Global warming is the only game in town right now, for sure. I mean, it is the big one. We don't get on top of this very quickly, get organised and get rid of it. We are dead men walking. And certainly our children and their children have no future at all. But to address your question, Mike, I think that besides that, we have an absolute multitude of concerns that need to be dealt with, and need to be dealt with by all of us having our say democratically.
Can you give us an example?
How long have we got? The number of potentially disastrous technologies that have been developed in only the last decade are enough to boggle the mind. And we have to make responsible decisions about the future of these things. We can't just leave these decisions to giant multinationals or governments, which for the most part are on the payroll of the multinationals. And especially we can't leave it to the military or the CIA or the KGB and organisations like that. I mean, you have to remember that the military think tanks are all about finding new ways to kill and suppress people. I mean, that's their job. That's what we pay them to do. And off the top of my head, I would nominate things like nanotechnology, cloning, biotronics, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, robotics, genetically modified foods, germ warfare, chemical warfare, atomic weapons, Star Wars, the synthetic biology, and there's many, many more. Any one of these technologies in the wrong hands can lead to monstrous injustices, and these new technologies could have profound impacts on the human race and the environment, and ultimately on the future of the planet.
So let's just take one of these, like your mentioned robots. What's wrong with robots?
Well, from a home helper robotic point of view, nothing at all, really. That would make them simply another labour-saving device. But of course, we being human are not going to just stop there. We will inevitably go down the artificial intelligence road with them and try to make robots indistinguishable from ourselves.
So what's wrong with that?
Oh, not a lot, provided that is all you do. I mean, I think it's 30% of people in Tokyo live alone, and there's a thriving business there where people are paid $35 an hour just to pretend to be a friend to these lonely people. So sure, if a robot can fill that role in a totally screwed up society like Tokyo, then why not? But if you make a robot that has a human level of intelligence, then of course the military are going to start looking at that for other applications. You know, the difference between Mary, your cute little robot maid who you play cards with every night, and the Terminator going into battle is merely the programming that comes with the CPU. Let's not forget that even now America has taken us down a very dangerous road with the introduction of drones. They've killed over 5,000 people already, some of them Americans. And they started out as mere spy aircraft. Yet now they are under mass production in places like China, Israel, Venezuela, and they have effectively changed the rules of war. We are now in another arms race. They've taken the justification of the imminence of the preemptive strike out of the attack equation. You can kill someone now based on the simple conclusion that at some time in the foreseeable future, that person may become a danger to us. And they're even thinking of turning that decision over to the drone itself based on an algorithm in the onboard computer. So very soon we can have hundreds of thousands of drones, even down to the size of mosquitoes, and all armed with weaponry. Look how they could be used as spying devices even in your own home. The cockroach drone, the mosquito drone, the moth drone, which I suppose is a reasonable segue into also considering growth of government surveillance of citizens right now. Here too, there is much cause for alarm. Hundreds of thousands of surveillance cameras are installed throughout the world each year without the general public's knowledge or permission. And these are being tied to facial recognition technologies so powerful that thousands of faces can be identified within seconds. And this is in a supposedly free democratic country. The English even have them in children's toilets at schools. The average citizen in London going out for the day can expect to be sighted at least 300 times by these cameras. And there's new technology I was just reading about the other day. It's called the visual microphone. It's a very high-speed camera that records objects located nearby people who are talking. So by measuring the microscopic vibrational variations of a nearby piece of paper on the ground, for instance, the conversation can actually be overheard. This means government spies in the future will not need microphones to listen to private conversations. Merely surveillance cameras alone will take care of it. And you don't even have to deploy them because they're already in place.
Well, that's utterly horrifying if you think about its implications.
It is the nightmare of Big Brother scenario come true, and we are only inches away from that right now. And that is just the tip of the iceberg, as they say. So imagine if global warming has really taken hold and wars have broken out everywhere, then martial law and military dictatorship is the next phase. And that's when all the surveillance technologies and the mountains of information on the internet social networks are unified and turned on the general population.
But what do you really think? Do you really think that will happen?
I think if we don't get on top of global warming, these sorts of things may definitely happen. And at the moment, the democratic governments throughout the world are not responding quickly and decisively enough to head off global warming. Scientists are urging us to go onto a full war footing to overcome this problem. And a lot of democratic leadership is not even publicly acknowledging that it is a problem. The Australian Prime Minister is a perfect example. He says witty things like, the sun doesn't shine at night, so we don't need solar panels. It is the people themselves that have to lead the way, and are leading the way, but they are doing it despite their governments, not because of them. And so I think it is up to us to expand the democratic process so that the people have real power and can make real change, and make the change quickly.
This is Mike Ratner, and I'm talking to C.J. Cronin, the author of the new fascinating novel, 2044, The New Democracy, and you are tuned to Green Talk Radio. I noticed in your new book, CJ, that you mentioned the Occupy movement quite a bit, and that a movement like that can be used to overtake major corporations and so on. Are you serious about that?
Yes, well, I should point out to your listeners that this is a fictional novel. But yes, I think the only way we are going to get rid of the corrupt banking system that allows so much greed and harm to be perpetrated on the otherwise innocent public and the environment is to take those banks over. But I'm not suggesting a bunch of radical students storm the banks and have a sit-in for weeks, which would only end in tears anyway. But what I am suggesting is the bank's existing staff take over the banks and run them as cooperatives. I think it is possible to do this with any major corporation, and I think any employees in such corporations would gladly embrace that concept, provided you give them the legal right to take over their companies. I mean, in a war, nationalisation is commonplace and necessary, and we are in a war. Most of us just don't realise that yet. So we have to take the laws, we have to have the laws in place first that allow us to do that. And the way to get those laws in place is by having full participatory democratic systems, as suggested in my book.
And you really think that is possible?
Look, global warming is a monumental problem, no question. But let's just take the greed of the banking system, for instance. If we were to initiate a tax of only 0.05 of only 1% of every bank transaction in 1 year, relating only to commercial transactions, not private transactions, then we could easily, seriously address the global warming problem. Because in 1 year, that infinitely tiny tax would yield over $200 billion in revenue. Now, if you took that tax at double that amount, say, which is still only 0.1 of only 1% of commercial transactions, you would not only fix global warming, you could also fix world hunger. As we speak, there are 1 billion people starving on Earth. There are more slaves on Earth right now than at any other time in history, more prisoners. And 99% of the reason for this is because of the greedy banks. They are the ones who finance the extraction and burning of fossil fuels. And while not one single banker went to jail after the 2008 stock exchange crash, which was brought about by the banks, and after which crime went down to record lows in the US, the population in the jails in the US doubled. So how's that possible? And guess who finances the private prisons in the US? The banks. And these prisons are on the stock exchange, with lobbyists petitioning the government constantly for longer jail sentences for convicts. If you're a prisoner and you don't work in a US jail for, I think it's only about 45 cents a day, you go into solitary confinement in a room the size of a car space. 1 in 10 Americans are in jail, and 1 in 9 black Americans are in jail. And this is the land of the free. And if I can paraphrase Thomas Jefferson, if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until they wake up homeless in the continent their fathers conquered. And guess what you now have in America? You've got the Federal Reserve, and you have homelessness, poverty, and hunger, and a pretty useless healthcare system. This while bankers are known to have stolen between 21 and 32 trillion dollars that they have hidden in tax havens.
Yes, well, of course, that all may be true, but I have to repeat here. Do you really think that a full participatory system, as you call it, will fix these problems, these injustices?
I think everyone on the planet is faced with two choices. I think we can do this the easy way, which is to campaign for a referendum for a new form of democracy and rapidly deal with global warming, or we can go down the road toward military dictatorship. And if we are very, very lucky in the latter case, we will not go into a runaway greenhouse event, which will ultimately destroy the entire planet and all life on Earth.
And lose all our freedoms in the military case.
Well, the military is the military. If we go into military dictatorship, whatever government you have at that stage will be able to completely dominate the general public because of the incredible surveillance that already exists in the modern era. And now, of course, we have satellites and aerial surveillance and all the rest of it. It would be far worse than Huxley's nightmarish 1984 prediction because it would literally be inescapable. But I would try to remind people of something else Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence, and it is this, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organising its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Now, you can't get it in much plainer English than that. And he also said, tyranny is when the people fear the government, liberty is when the government fears the people. Liberty is when the government fears the people, and that's exactly the way it should be. We are their employers.
I think you know American history better than most Americans.
Well, to be frank, I think a lot of Americans have forgotten their history. I mean, just like in the film Gladiator, when they say Rome was once a noble idea, and in the end the Romans lost their way, when they lost their democracy, they lost it for 1,000 years. And that's historically true. And at the time, they were the most powerful nation on earth. We are not immune from history. Remember, there is evidence that many civilizations have absolutely and catastrophically failed in the past. I mean, ancient Egypt's a perfect example. But this will be the first time ever that civilization has failed on a global scale. And it may well be the last. We've never tested this before. And everyone should pay great attention to this. And since I'm having a Thomas Jefferson quote fest here, here's another one. He said, I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. And the issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs.
So your concept really is to restore the fundamental rights of people as guaranteed by the original American Constitution. And a major part of that is disenfranchising the banks?
No, but in spirit, yes. And to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organising its power in such form as to affect people's safety and happiness. And not just in the United States, but globally. So I am saying, let the people who run the banks take them over and own them. And that includes the people who keep their money in them. And the banks remain functioning as usual, but the financial pirates behind them are disarmed and, if necessary, held to account. You know, where's the $32 trillion?
So you're not scared off from the concept of a new world order like so many people?
I think I think people who are scared of a new world order under our current corrupt systems are absolutely right to be scared, terrified of any move to establish a world government through force and suppression, absolutely. But to initiate a system via the free will of the people is both a desirable and sensible outcome. Global warming affects each and every one of us. You know, a rising sea will drown you, no matter what race or nationality or how rich you are, and a rising temperature will kill you just as quick. What good is money to a rich person if there's no one left to wait on them? You know, what good is paper money or gold? All you've got is toilet paper and a good doorstop.
So how are you going to tackle such a monumental problem as this? I mean, in your book, the main character starts an urban farming TV show. So is that how you are going to start out, you know, reality imitating art?
No, not at all, no. The book is just a vehicle to illustrate an idea. My process is pretty straightforward. There has been some interest in making this into a feature film, and if I can scrape together enough money, I can build a pretty complex website where we can run a proxy best government, just as a demo for people to try out. My idea is to base a fiat currency on biochar in much the same way as money was based on gold. And because the biochar is something of value, there is a way that people can use that currency as genuine money. So just by joining up, people can become active traders and make quite a good profit. And if we make enough biochar, and I stress in the right way, because otherwise it can become an oxygen sink, and we bury that as fertiliser, we are in fact sequestering carbon into the ground, and we are making the ground much more fertile, so we get much more plants. So it's win-win, and we can elect our own witness using senior journalists from around the world, and form our own panel of philosophers to serve as members of an honorary best government. All this is completely possible. It all depends on money.
But I should imagine that a lot of people, especially heavy hitters in the fossil fuel and banking industries, might take a very negative view towards you if you did try to do those things.
Well, sure. They can make me a martyr if they like. That'll boost book and movie sales for sure. And I'm certainly happy with how long I've lived already anyway. So, I mean, it's all downhill from here as it goes. What do they say? When you're over the hill, you pick up speed. And but the stupid part is, the part that actually annoys me is that all of this trouble is just so unnecessary, because it boils down to absolute penny pinching of some very greedy men and women that own at least half of the world's wealth and run such things as fossil fuels and banks and governments which subsidise fossil fuels. We subsidise the petrol at our petrol pumps. Just take that subsidy off, give it over to renewable energies. That's all you need to do. But, you know, they don't do that. I mean, how much imagination does it take to think of a little laterally and fix these problems? You know, I was surfing on the net the other day, and I read that NASA has found a new way to knock the carbon atoms off CO2 using ultraviolet lasers. And they're doing that so they can recycle air for astronauts to breathe, right? Now, I mean, how difficult would it be to apply that technology to a coal-powered power station's exhaust chimneys? And then you would not only produce a lot of carbon that could be sequestered straight back into the ground or made into bricks and put into buildings or carbon fibre or whatever, but you would also be boosting the oxygen levels in the atmosphere, and you could sing that you've done that from the rooftops in celebration of burning coal. Because most people don't realise that we are not only producing far too much carbon dioxide, we are also reducing the oxygen in the atmosphere at the same time, down to dangerous levels. You cut down rainforests and burn them and pollute the sea with plastics and sewage and whatever, and pretty soon your oxygen levels begin to fall like a lead balloon. So if a 10-year-old primary school student can see that by zapping carbon dioxide with lasers you can stop the CO2 escaping and at the same time save the world from an oxygen drought, why wouldn't you do it? I mean, you do that and you can still use your damn coal. And why wouldn't you be feeding the CO2 into algae farms and making biofuels? Why isn't that compulsory government policy already? This is all old news. But they're not doing it, are they? Because these rich people will not invest in R&D. They are only interested in making as much money as they can in the short term. They do not think beyond their own short-term greed, and people have to wake up and realise that time is quickly approaching when we are going to have to outlaw fossil fuels completely. And for heaven's sakes, let's start with fracking.